Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Talk to the Hand 3. No, sadly not. We're here to talk about Terminator 3, and in this video we're going to be going through the Easter eggs, making of trivia, and behind the scenes details. Now, I know it seems like I've been putting this film off for quite a while now, but this is actually a movie I have quite fond memories of. This was a film that released just before my birthday, and to celebrate that, me and my mates all went to the Odeon in Newcastle and had a blast. The film actually messed up towards the last half hour, and they had to restart it from the midpoint of the movie. Now, it was a weird experience retreading a lot of the film we just watched, which made it feel more predictable. However, because of that, when we got to that twist at the end, it felt even more shocking. That's always the first thing I think of when I think of this movie, and even now, I feel like it's the franchise's biggest gut punch. Killing John Connor in Dark Fate was, but for different reasons there. Either way, from what I remember of the movie, this was basically a remake of Terminator 2. Going back through it though, I found a lot of things to like, and it's probably my fourth favourite film in the franchise. We are going to be breaking it all down, but firstly, I just want to quickly shout out the hashtag Justice for Charlie. That's from friend of the channel Trevor Weller, which is the t-shirt I'm wearing for today's video, and Trevor's basically trying to raise awareness for the medical malpractice of his father. I'll leave a link to the page where you can learn more, and also find ways to support. Now, in the wake of Terminator 2, Cameron had stated he wasn't interested in doing a sequel, and believed that Part 1 and 2 acted like a perfect self-contained story. Part 1 was about parents, with this being seen in the three main characters. Sarah was the mother and Kyle was the father, but the Terminator was also a father as well. Just in the same way that Kyle had travelled back and made his son, the Terminator had also helped to make Skynet. That movie was a perfect loop, but Part 2 showed the future had a different path. The idea of a child taking things in a different direction that broke the cycle of their parents thematically was a really good way to end it. At least to me. All Cameron's ever said is that it ended things full circle, and that's how I've always seen the movies. But Hollywood's gonna Hollywood, and unfortunately Cameron only owned 50% of the rights. We've done a big breakdown on the first film, so I don't just want to go over everything again, but he sold the rights to Gale and Heard for $1. This came with the stipulation that he'd get to direct it, and Heard apparently did some rewrites on the script. The pair ended up getting married, but by 1989 this had ended in divorce. Still though, she had some say in how it was handled, and economic pressures led to things being put into production. Terminator 2 broke the bank and was the third highest grossing film of all time after its release in 1991. Carol Cohen TriStar Pictures wanted a sequel turnaround in 5 years, but they filed for bankruptcy in 1995. 20th Century Fox later sought the rights, and Cameron started putting things together. Now, while this was going on, he created the 3D ride Terminator 2 Battle Across Time. This opened at Universal Studios in 1996 and saw the majority of 2's cast returning. However, it was quickly decided that this wouldn't be canon, and you wouldn't have needed to know the ride for the next film. Fox started putting deals in place and signed Arnold Schwarzenegger to a sequel. Cameron then committed to writing and producing it, and Linda Hamilton was approached about returning. However, after seeing how much Cameron had spent on Titanic, the studio got cold feet. It was apparently a nightmare behind the scenes, with several studios constantly bidding for the rights. This ended with Cameron getting frustrated, and he said he started to feel like he'd moved beyond it. Titanic had been a major hit as well, and he wanted to do more than just keep making Terminator movies. However, he did give Schwarzenegger his blessing and advised him to do a third film if they had a good script. He also said they'd probably pay him a lot more money, so it just seemed like a no-brainer. Cameron said he felt like the Terminator was just as much Arnold's as it was his, so he had no problem with him continuing the franchise. So the ball got rolling, with the initial plan being they'd shoot 3 and 4 back to back. However, there was the worry that 3 might not be successful, so they ended up just going with the one movie. Now, the original plan was to have John Connor working in a .com company, which ended up creating Skynet. He ends up having a hand in this, and it's a far cry from the Nomad we ended up getting. Also, like, what point do you realize that you're actually making Skynet? However, certain elements made it across from this, with the script's film being a female Terminator. Now, originally she would be able to turn invisible and be more in line with the Predator. Arnie, of course, fought one already, so they thought it might be best to do something else. Cameron was approached again, along with Ang Lee and Ridley Scott, but they all passed to do other projects. Ang Lee went on to make The Hulk, which, breakdown on the channel, Raz Scott began production on Black Hawk Down. Jonathan Mostow then ended up signing on, but he said he wasn't shy about what he was going to do. Mostow said, "Here's the movie I'm going to make. Here's how I'm going to do it. If you don't want to do it my way, you should find a different director." So he played hardball with the studio and ended up rewriting most of the script and turned it into what he described as a road movie. They also explained Schwarzenegger's age by referring to him as an obsolete Terminator. Unfortunately, Hamilton dropped out after reading the script, saying she felt like her character had nowhere left to go. They offered me the part, I read it, and I knew my character arc was so complete in the first two, and in the third one, it was a negligible character. She died halfway through, and there was no time to mourn her. It was kinda disposable, so I said, no thank you, and go fuck yourself. Hey, she didn't say that, but she was thinking it. Either way, we know Sarah died on the way back to her home planet in the final release. Now though Edward Furlong was initially set to return, there were worries that his highly publicized substance abuse issues could jeopardize the project. According to his own words, he got the gig and was part of the project and celebrated by going out and doing loads of coke. He said it was part of the learning process of addiction, and losing it kind of paved the way to him getting back on track. Mostow felt it might be too risky when trying to secure a studio, and thus they felt the safest option was to go with someone else. Warner Brothers then won the US distribution rights, with Columbia and TriStar getting international. At the time, it was the most expensive film to ever be greenlit, with it costing $170 million. This included a record-breaking $30 million for Schwarzenegger's salary. On top of this, his lawyer Jacob A. Bloom had also negotiated it as being pay-or-play. This meant, right, whether the studio made the movie or not, he was still gonna get the money. Along with this, his perks included $1.5 million for private jets, a fully equipped gym built into a trailer, 3-bedroom deluxe rooms at hotels, round-the-clock limousines, and several personal bodyguards. Along with this, he got 20% of the theater sales, DVDs, television licensing, in-flight entertainment sales, and also video games. I'll be bucks. Like, I'll make bucks. I'll make the bucks. Fuck's sake. However, at one point he did worry the movie was going to be over budget, so he gave back $1.4 million of his salary. This was so they could pull off the crane smashing through the glass building, which to be fair is one of the film's most memorable parts. Now as for the movie itself, we begin with John Connor narrating the fall of humanity and the rise of machines. He says,
"There is no fate but what we make for ourselves."
Which is of course a message Cameron tried to hammer home during the prior movie. The message also appears on Sarah's grave, and it's what she carved into the wood during T2. However, as we learn, no fate isn't exactly the case, and Judgment Day is simply taking a rain check. However, we see the original timeline here, including the firing of the nukes. Originally, this was supposed to be more in line with the one from Terminator 2, which at the time was praised for its realism. We were going to see the Hollywood sign being destroyed, along with the Statue of Liberty. However, you have to remember this was released in 2003, and after September 11th, they felt it might be a bit too close to home. Thus, they went with this more computer-generated effect and just the focus on the one city. Cutting to John driving on the road at night, this is also how the second Terminator ended. The first had Sarah hitting the road, which was then coupled with the ending of the follow-up film. There Sarah said that the storm was coming, which is a line that Connor says here.
"All my life, my mother told me the storm was coming." This
instantly makes you feel like we're back, with us getting lots of shots of the ground akin to the second film's ending. We then see the future with a flash of Connor and humanity winning the war. Now Nick Stahl got pretty criticised for this film, with people saying it was a very big miscast. However, Jonathan Mostow clearly wanted this kind of actor to play the saviour, with John Krasinski also being in the running for the part. When describing his vision, Mostow said, "John is a very different character now. He is someone who's carried the burden of being a leader in the future, and it's very lonely because nobody else in the world knows about it or believes it. Even if he tried to explain to somebody, they'd think he was crazy, and that's a really interesting character. He's pretty downtrodden and depressed, working off the grid so he can't be tracked. Even though he thinks the machines have been stopped, that paranoia and training is still in full effect." Now we then cut to him sitting on a bridge, with this scene having a deeper meaning in the script. John was actually contemplating ending it all here because his life had no meaning without the war. At 45 minutes, he explains to Kate what it's like to know you might be the most important person who ever lived. However, with it comes a catch, and in order to be that person, humanity has to die. So it's either that or be a loser, and there's not really a positive outcome. So you can see why he's basically Luke from The Last Jedi and completely depressed about what his life is. Dropping a cool cool refreshing bottle of Budweiser, we see it fall into a nightmare vision of skulls lining the water. I love this whole scene and how it pans up to the hunter-killer with us seeing probably what's the best version of the war up until this point. Now, according to IMDb trivia, most of these skulls were made from ping pong balls, with a lot of the background ones just being changed by the artistic team. What really takes center stage here is the Terminator though, with him looking directly into the camera, which awakens John. He's hiding under a bridge here, and it does remind me a lot of where Kyle and Sarah laid low in the first film. Honestly though, it's a really strong way to start the movie off, and from the beginning I was completely gripped. Avoiding a deer in the road, John's then thrown from his bike, and it's this chance of fate that really sets things off. Cutting across to Beverly Hills, we then see the arrival of the TX. Now, there was a point where they went back and forth on a female Terminator and worried that a woman might not be as intimidating. Certain versions had them reworking it as a male, with Vin Diesel being the studio's first choice. The Rock and 50 Cent were also considered, but I think in the end they did the right thing in keeping it a woman. This led to Famke Janssen being asked, who I think would have been brilliant in the role. She of course played Xenia on a top in GoldenEye, and her career was coming out on a top due to the X-Men movies, eh? Ultimately though, she turned it down, but Jennifer Lopez, China, and Carrie-Anne Moss were also considered too. The latter would have been excellent as well, but obviously the Matrix movies and Terminator franchises, they're both probably too similar for her to do both. Breakdown on the channel now as well. In the end, Schwarzenegger chose Kristanna Loken, who fits the role really well. Melting the face of a mannequin, it kinda highlights how she's a step above these fake women. Although I might be reaching here, it did remind me of the shot in T2 where the T-1000 looks at a mannequin as well. This little thing was foreshadowing his true form, and I feel like this sort of builds off the back of that. Loken filmed the entire scene completely nude and described walking down Rodeo Drive as being a bit daunting. Apparently tourists were watching on, but she said there was no way out the scene because everyone knows the future people always show up naked.
Are you pro-civilization or not?
The worst part was though that she apparently stood on some broken glass which ended up getting lodged in her foot. Now the script had a bit more of the woman who we see coming away from the ATM. Originally she was going to use it, but the machine would glitch out and then stop working. This, along with Kate's scanner in the shop, the virus on the news report, the 911 call being cut off at 29 minutes, and the lack of TV signals would generally help to indicate the computer virus was taking over. The TX was originally going to be the one carrying it with her, with this affecting nearby networks. This would then enter cyberspace, and the TX would then upload Skynet to the AI, which would then hunt and destroy the virus before taking everything over. It's way simpler what they do in the end, and either way she steals the clothes in the woman's car after saying she likes them.
I like this car.
Which was put in as a reference to the T-1000.
Say, that's a nice bike.
She also says she likes the cop's gun and that she likes the video. If you go back to the window she walked into, you can also see the phrase on it says, "I like this look." She never reads it though, but originally they were going to tie it in with that. I think that kind of sums up this movie in general, where all the pieces are there, but for whatever reason, they didn't put them together properly. The cop's gun is also what she ends up using throughout these early hits, with her taking the weapon directly from him. Now at the time, they of course had a major tie-in game, which we get some subtle references to. After the TX does the old dial-up noise, which takes me back, we can see her targets populated on screen. In the right we can catch John Connors the primary, and below his name Elizabeth and William Anderson. Both were lieutenants in the game, which we get a reference to during the killing spree.
I'm Bill, my sister's upstairs.
The novelization had Elizabeth upstairs playing a video game, which was all going to tie in with that. Either way, we have a policeman pulling over the TX, and she stares up at a Victoria's Secret poster. This is Brazilian model Adriana Lima, who helps to implant the idea that TX can use her sexuality. Loken said this was one of the most interesting parts of the film, as the TX could manipulate men and use her appearance as a weapon. Her boobs inflate, and this was apparently a nightmare to film because the air bladders they were using kept malfunctioning. One would inflate too much, the other wouldn't inflate at the right time, and it was hard to get them to sync up. Like I said, mate, nightmare. But breaking down the science behind the boob inflation. Ryan Airy could never. Either way, we cut to the store with Brewster trying to scan a lovely plate.
I hate machines.
Cause of the movie. Either way, I love how it kind of shows how mundane everyone's life was before the machine struck. The most important people in the war were working at fast food restaurants and trying to buy plates for their little homes. I actually think shooting this in the sequel back to back would have been brilliant, because we could have seen these same characters having to adapt to life in the wasteland. Salvation's a film I really enjoy, but I also would have loved to have seen these actors carry over. Now Claire Danes originally originally wasn't cast in the role, and Sophia Bush actually shot a month worth of scenes for the movie. However, Mostow felt Bush seemed way too young and tried several tricks to make her look older. In the end though, the camera doesn't lie, and 19 looks way younger than the 23 that she was playing. So they replaced her with Danes, with Mostow saying it was heartbreaking because it was such a huge break for her. Getting a call from her dad, we hear how he's married to his job and has to cancel another time in which he'll get to meet his daughter's fiance. The novelization told us that he was a workaholic and that Kate was raised on an army base. According to IMDb trivia, this links into how she knows the difference between a real gun and a paintball one, which John later pulls on her.
Next time bring a clue, not a paintball gun.
Now because Kate's dad was a workaholic, his wife ended up leaving him. Kate kinda retreated inside herself, and the book says she started working with animals, as you know where you stand with them. General Brewster's then taken into an office and the virus is explained to him. He's told that they should unleash their AI, which will find and destroy the virus, but Brewster's got his reservations. I think these moments are even more relevant today as AIs become so ingrained in our society. You do wonder what would happen if one went rogue and had access to everything on Earth. So the movie's still worth talking about, and we learn about the virus's progress throughout the movie. Later on, he's told the virus has now entered air traffic, internet and power plants, which are the trifecta of critical systems in which humanity can be taken down. We're so reliant on computers now that a breach of this magnitude means that Skynet has access to our most critical systems. The novelization explained that Cyberdyne went bankrupt and then Skynet was bought by CRS. This was then overseen by the Pentagon, with a system costing $15 billion. Now from here we cut to the arrival of the Terminator. We're 10 minutes in and the Terminator's here. The model is actually a T-850, whereas in the first film it was a T-100. The T-800 was in Terminator 2, so this is a slight adjustment from that, with the biggest difference being between 1 and 2. Arriving in the desert, this also speaks to how scrappy the humans are. Whereas the TX showed up next to all its targets, the human helper is miles and miles away. In the first film, Reese was dumped in an alleyway, whereas the machine arrived kneeling down. It highlighted the difference between the two, which this also helps to hammer home. Now one of my favourite details is when Arnie starts walking and we cut to the bottom of the sphere. We can hear and see the crunching of glass and see the sands now turned into it. This shows that the sphere was so hot it actually melted the sand into glass. Now at the channel, we try and be as fair as possible, so we've got to break down the signs behind Arnie's boobies as well. Guy is absolutely ripped, and like Logan, he was worried about the nude scene too. At this point, he knew people expected it, as it had become a staple of the series. However, being 54 at the time of filming, he was obviously worried about getting back into shape. However, Arnold worked out for 3 hours a day over the space of 6 months, and this paid off in the end. He managed to get to the exact same body weight and muscle measurements he had while shooting Terminator 2. That was 12 years prior, when the guy was 42. It's impressive as hell, and he enters the strip club, and is that a Confederate flag? Hey, what kind of bar is this? Now, this is where it kind of tells you what sort of movie it is as well. Told to go around to the back because he's nude, he then ends up entering to find a guy dancing to Macho Man by the Village People.
Take off your clothes.
Patience, honey.
He then says,
Talk to the hand.
before wearing his star-shaped sunglasses outside. Yep. It's one of them movies, mate. Now at the time, I was wondering why he would be programmed to have fashion sense that makes him look cool. However, the novelization explains that he wished to look similar to the original Terminator, so John would be more trusting of him. This was part of his program, and likely put in place by Catherine in the future. This is why he wears the sunglasses from the truck, and we also see how he got the shotgun here. In a blink and you'll miss it moment, as he smashes the glass, we can catch one hanging up in the back. Looking for the keys, he pulls down the visor, which is what John told him to do in Terminator 2. Because of this, fans have said it indicates the Terminators have neural net learning capabilities and a shared knowledge bucket that allows them to all learn the same thing. Now originally, they were going to go a much darker route and have the T-850 killing the stripper. From what I can gather from the test screenings, the original cut had a much darker tone. However, upon reviewing it, they decided to lighten it up, but you can definitely see that original tone in the TX's mission. On her killing spree, we see her pulling up to Jim's Burgers, which is a little nod to James Cameron. She then goes to the party and we see a little robot dog thing on the table, which takes me back, mate. Every house used to have one.
The more you teach him, the smarter he gets.
The CPU is a neural net processor, a learning computer.
Cutting to Kate getting a call on a Nokia. Wait, I wish I could go back. She wakes up to her fiance, which is the last time the pair will be together. Now in the movie, you might pick up on her fiance being referred to as Scott Mason.
You're
her fiance is Scott Mason.
However, come the credits, you can see his name, Scott Peterson. Now, the changing of this was due to a real-life murder that happened at the time, which shared some eerie similarities. There was a man named Scott Peterson from California who in 2002 was convicted of killing his wife. At the time, she was pregnant, with the pair also planning on naming their child Connor. Not only was this deemed too similar to the plot of the original movie, but they also felt like Kate's kidnapping story might cause issues. Pretty insane, so you can see why they changed it, even though the credits list his name as Peterson. Also, I might call Catherine Kate or Katie because they constantly change her name throughout the movie. Like, her dad calls her Katie, but she's called Catherine Brewster. Moving on. Now we see as John bunkers down at the animal hospital to get some medicine, which is when Kate comes in. John can't go to hospitals or doctors, so he's had to resort to this. Either way, John gets put up in a cage, and we get bloody Betsy bringing her cat in. Always knocking, bringing in her cat because she says they've got pneumonia.
This is an emergency. It sounds like a hairball.
Honestly, yeah, she deserves to die, mate, and I'm glad she's dead. I'm just sick of annoying people looking at you, personal assistant from Jurassic World. Kate goes back in and brings up Mike Kripke's basement, and she asks why John disappeared in the 8th grade. His foster parents were then killed and he was never seen again, so you can kind of see why this would have stuck with Kate. It's also the first kiss apparently as well. John doesn't remember it right away though because he's a player, but he later recalls the pair kissed and that this happened the night before T2. Now though they say there's no such thing as fate, I feel like this is another indicator there is. The pair were supposed to meet and it was their destiny to fall in love, and women love that stuff, mate. And he starts selling her all out. Either way, the TX arrives by shooting Betsy and tasting her blood. It's such a great scene, especially when she says no and looks up, and it kind of leans into the horror vibes that the franchise started with. I feel tonally that this is the direction that they should have gone, because this feels like the slasher that the first film was. Just having this killer hunting and stalking is such a great way to use the TX. It also highlights her capabilities and how she can scan the DNA of her targets. This leads into her discovering John's bandage, which she has an almost orgasmic reaction to. It's kind of weird, kind of hot, but it leans into something they often do with horror, where you have this whole sexy murderer thing trying to kill you. Species, you changed the game. Now Logan knew that she had so little lines that she really had to do a lot of things non-verbally to make her performance memorable. She practiced with a mime coach for several weeks and tried to do as much with her expressions as possible. Even in the bathroom fight around the 1 hour 19 mark, she has a bit where she walks along and just looks at her reflection. It all kinda adds to the character and makes her more than just a soulless machine. Either way, she's close to her primary target, and this now becomes the priority above all else. This is why she doesn't kill Kate, and knowing that this is his wife makes her think she can get more info. Luckily for her, the Terminator arrives, and you might also notice he destroys the TX's car unintentionally. This can be seen in the fire, with it appearing throughout the scene in the background. Unfortunately, he's knocked the TX right beside John, and we see her liquid metal forming over her hand. This highlights the truth about the machine, with it being a mix between the first two Terminators. You have the endoskeleton from the first film, and then the T-1000's liquid metal. So it's a great combination of the two, and we get some nods to the prior movies in the next moment. Running into the corridor, John sees the machine, and everything then goes into slow-mo. This is akin to the arrival of the T-800 at the mall in the second film, which made everyone want to go get a Pepsi. Sarah then saw it in slow motion at the asylum as well, and I love how they continue this motif. Fighting in the car park, we see just how unstoppable she is, and that she's able to make complex weapons. This is something they said the T-1000 couldn't do, with it being unable to make complex parts. Thus it relied on just using blade-like weapons, whereas the TX is far more advanced. This includes the ability to control machines, with her sending a squadron of emergency vehicles after John. She joins them in the crane truck, which leads into a great chase scene. In interviews, Mostow said this was extremely important, as chases like this had been a staple of the franchise. This is why Arnie gave up some of his salary, as he knew how much it meant for the movie. You also see him pulling a trooper off a bike, which looks like the one that the T-1000 rode. When doing this, he says,
Get off!
Which is another thing they've done throughout the franchise. In the first film, he told the truck driver to get out, and then the T-1000 said it when stealing the helicopter. Arnold later brings things full circle with the fire engine when he shoves the firefighters out and says,
Get out!
So they are trying to keep things in line, but it doesn't feel like the ham-fisted fan service like we've been seeing in more recent movies.
Say the line, Bart!
Get away from her, you bitch. Hitting a car, I'll always remember the The goddammit, a cop when you need one line. Now if this guy seems familiar, then this is because it's Billy D. Lucas. You might not remember the name, but he was actually Arnold's personal stuntman on a lot of films. That includes not only True Lies, but also of course the Terminator movies. As the truck comes around the corner, we also see a poster for Reign of Fire, which takes me back. Now as things go to hell, we see the truck smashing up the street and destroying lots of lampposts and cars. This is where a lot of the budget went, with it also going into what happens when Arnie's hanging off the crane. We see him going crashing through a building, which in today's reliance on CGI is such an impressive scene. This was all done practically, with the building taking 2 weeks to build. The crane itself weighed 140 tons and they only had one chance to pull it off. Either way, they managed it, with it being a standout set in the movie. Now they did try flipping the crane later on, but this was too dangerous and near impossible to pull off. So it had to be done with CGI, though Christopher Nolan would later manage a similar stunt for real during The Dark Knight. It kind of feels like it riffs off the truck crash that ended the bike scene in T2, with the machine emerging from the wreckage like the T-1000. Doesn't look as cool yet, but it leads to a bit of breathing room where we get some exposition. Mostow said he wanted all the scenes like this to be delivered on the road, so we never get the feeling of losing dynamism. They then end up heading to the desert, which is also a move that Sarah did as well. This was so she wouldn't be near the main city centre, as these would be targets for the nukes. The Terminator doing this kind of highlights its main mission, which is to actually protect the pair from the fallout. He says that Judgment Day can only be postponed, and future John Connor has come to accept this. So the mission is really to just keep them safe until it passes, rather than trying to avert it. As the T-850 says, he's an obsolete machine who doesn't stand a chance against the TX. Described as an anti-Terminator Terminator, Skynet's now used to the tricks of the humans. So they have a Terminator built solely for destroying the humans' protectors, because it's the same old tactic. Postponing Judgment Day further would also mean John would be way older and probably not in shape to save humanity. Going to a gas station, this is apparently the one that appeared in the prior two films. It definitely looks like the one from T2 where they lay low after escaping the asylum. According to IMDb trivia though, this is the one from the first film which Sarah visits at the end. It's difficult to make out due to the camera angles being different, and the area has probably changed a lot in 20 years. But that's what they say, with it highlighting the trip back down memory lane for the audience. Now the Terminator was originally going to eat in the movie, which would help add to its damaged cells. James Cameron included this in his treatment for the first film, but they ended up cutting it out. They then plan to do it for this film, which is why he picks up the food that he does. This includes a Manna bar, which is an Austrian snack and one of Arnold's favourites. Here, the high calories would help it heal and sort out that big hole in his chest. I think. Not a dietitian, mate. Just a lot of fat and a lot of sugar. However, the food he steals are all made up of carbs, beef jerky for protein, Twinkies for sugar, and water to keep them hydrated. Cutting over to Scott, we get a nice Exorcist nod as the TX spins around on the bed. We can also hear a chainsaw revving as Scott gets killed, which may be a nod to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Lastly, the TX puts her hand through the policeman, with the blood in the way it's done seeming akin to the chestburster. Now if you love the classics, then check out our merch store right below the video. Not only do we have our newly launched chestburster t-shirt, but we also have our Terminator vs Xenomorph one. This celebrates some of our favourite movies in 8-bit, and if you're from the 80s and want to show you're not obsolete, then definitely pick one up. We also have our partners at Arrow Video, who sell loads of 4K Blu-rays on their website. They've just dropped an amazing Silence of the Lamb box set, and if you want to pick it up and get 10% off, then click my link in the description. Just use the code Heavy Spoilers and you get 10% off anytime you buy from Arrow. Shabow! Now the police arrives and he goes with them to the cemetery, which we see the truck pulling into. Here we can see the name O'Brien, which Reddit believes is a nod to O'Brien from 1984. This character lived in a dystopian future, which is where the series is headed. This cemetery is also called Green Lawn Cemetery, which is a nod to where Norman Bates' mother was buried. Psycho ends with a skeletal look on her face, with this horrifying image of a skeleton, of course, being akin to the Terminator. Reach! Going to Sarah's quote-unquote grave, we learn this is actually a weapons lockup. We discover that she was cremated in Mexico and her ashes were scattered to the sea. The weapons were stored here in line with her will, and we hear about her leukemia diagnosis. Sarah was given 6 months, but she lasted for 3 years to make sure Judgment Day didn't happen. John quotes her saying,
Every day after this one is a gift.
Now this is actually a nod to the alternate ending of T2, which can be found on the Ultimate Edition.
I wanted to run through the street yelling, to grab them all and say, every day from this day on is a gift.
The Terminator then performs an Ace Ventura bullet catch, and this confirms to Kate that he is indeed a robot. The police then arrive and Kate runs out in the confusion, which leads to the MVP of the franchise. Dr. Silberman is back for one of my favourite cinema moments ever. Just the guy clearly remembering encountering the Terminator and trying to use his techniques to justify what happened.
You find yourself imagining things. Impossible things. Crazy things. Insane things. Take years to get over it.
Just the linger there, absolutely brilliant, and you see all this trauma is caused in just a look. Now this is Earl Bowen's third and final appearance, making him the only other actor to appear in all 3 films. Guy survived 3 run-ins with the Terminator though, and maybe he should have been the one protecting John. Now Bowen wasn't going to be the only returning actor, and Lance Henriksen was also approached. Henriksen was originally intended to play the Terminator, and Cameron even took him to pictures in costume. He was then cast as the detective who was seemingly killed during the first film. However, the character was going to return in a wheelchair, but they ended up dropping this idea. Along with this moment, we also have a deleted scene that showed Silberman's fate towards the end. Silberman would be seen as the nuke strikes, with him being caught in the blast. Sarah did warn you, mate, though, to be fair. She did say anyone not wearing 2 million sunblock was going to have a really bad day. This would then be similar to the dream sequence in T2, where we saw people torn apart by the explosion. Again though, the closeness to September 11th made the creative team decide to scrap it. According to the trivia, the VFX team were instructed to make it so the nuke should be relatively low quality when compared to the one from T2. They just thought it might cause too many issues, and the Silberman scene was cut. Either way, we see the Terminator exiting with a coffin on his shoulder and get a slow-mo moment as he turns towards Silberman. Cracked me up just seeing how it's like John, Sarah and Silberman that all get these slow-mo moments the first time they see him. Guy's just as important, and he ends up running away. To me, I like to think the guy fled to Mexico and made it out. That scene was deleted for a reason. Now this scene was apparently also really difficult to film due to the amount of weight that Arnie had on him. Just his jacket alone weighed 40 pounds, and then you had the coffin on his shoulders. Though this was a lightweight one, the gun was still really heavy, and thus they used a harness to hold things in place. These were then digitally removed to give the impression he was really lifting all of that. Spraying bullets everywhere, he still gets no casualties, which is a nod to the scene from T2. During this we see several names as well, with the majority of these belonging to the VFX artists. Telling John they need Catherine because of her connection to Skynet and her dad, he also says that she's his wife. Well, at this point, Scott arrives and we see as he morphs into the TX. I would have kept up the cover, but I love how just as he pulls away, you can see 2 dead officers, which is a great bit of attention to detail. The effect is similar to the Liquid Terminator, with both actors following the same path. The shots were then lined up and composited over, so we get the transition between them with blending techniques being used. However, the actor behind Scott was a bit shorter than Loken, so he had to wear platform shoes to be the same height. Blown back, the TX then stands up and her shoulder starts to heal before she then starts to sprint. Both moments are clearly based off the T-1000, with the next conversation riffing off Terminator 2 as well.
Your fiancé is dead.
This calls back to the machine calling John's foster parents and then informing him the pair were dead.
Your foster parents are dead.
Also in the T2 breakdown, I had lots of comments asking what I meant by saying Howard Stern was in True Grit. I read them like, what do you mean, mate? So I went back and listened to what I said. One of the coolest things that Arnie does is how he reloads the shotgun, and this was actually a nod to how it's done in True Grit. I said how it's done, not Howard Stern. But to be fair, it's not your fault, mate. I've got a stupid accent. Now the TX ends up jumping on top of the hearse in another stunt that was done practically with wire work. Still though, going from a shot of someone running from a hill to then jumping on a car and timing it correctly is absolutely brilliant. Arnold also says, "Get down!" which is of course one of his famous catchphrases. Get down!
Get down! Get down!
Get down! Get down! Get down!
Get down! Get down! Get down!
Terrible. Badly damaged, we see the TX cycling through alternate weapons, with one of these being named a Rumsfeld P81 Caustic. According to IMDb trivia, this was a nod to the Secretary of Defense at the time, Donald Rumsfeld. Along with it, we can also see the Needler and Pulse Rifle, with these being nods to Halo and Aliens. Now we then learn that the TX is going to kill Catherine's father, as he's one of the last voices arguing caution. In the original timeline though, John would have stuck with Catherine after the basement, and eventually have gone on to meet her father. It's said in the wiki, and also hinted at in the movie, that that John could have talked him into shutting down Skynet. It's at this point we learn Catherine's actually the one in control, and she orders the machine to go and help save her father. Now we discover that the T-850 killed John, and that he did this on July 4th. That is of course Independence Day, with it having some poetry to it due to him leading humanity to their victory. Now at the base we get a scene with Brewster where he sees the prototypes of the hunter killers. To the left hand side, as we get a closer look, we can also see a prototype man looking robot. We were then going to get a great deleted scene that I'm still a bit angry they didn't include in the movie. This started off with a demonstration of the hunter killers before showing the T1s. However, then went to this.
Hi, I'm Chief Master Sergeant William Candy.
Used as the basis for the look of the machines, this would explain why they all look the same. We then got this great joke.
I don't know about that accent.
We can fix it.
Arnold's accent was of course a major talking point when he was first starting out, but these days you can't imagine the Terminator without it. Now they apparently gave him a hillbilly one because Arnold's Austrian one is seen as being Hicks-like to the Germans. In the German releases of the original films, they actually have his voice dubbed over with a completely different actor, even though Arnold can speak German. This is because to their ears, his voice apparently sounds more goofish, so it just isn't seen as threatening. So it's a little nod to that, and we were later going to get a scene where Brewster was going to ask the Terminator if he was Candy. The Terminator was then going to say, "No, but I was made here." However, they never got the chance to film that scene, and they worried that the prior scene might not work as its own thing, so they ended up scrapping both, which still hurts, mate. After a tender moment with Kate and John, we then see as the TX infiltrates the base. Pressure is put on the General to unleash Skynet, and eventually he caves in. He gives full control of the military over to Skynet, which it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them. Now while this is going on, the TX activates the T1s. These were actually fully functioning robots built by the legendary Stan Winston. Hydraulically powered, they were able to move and operate about the set. The neck pistons and wiring was also done on purpose to play into the eventual design of the T100. Red lights for eyes were also added, along with the same silver colour being brought across. The tank treads also played into the larger ones that we saw rolling over the skulls in the previous movies. Overall, it's a great design, and I love how you can see how they worked backwards to make them. Along with these, Winston also created life-size fully robotic replicas of Arnold and Kristana, which could be used in scenes with explosions. Now after Skynet's release, the TX arrives posing as Kate before it's gunned down by the Terminator. First time seeing this, I was a bit like, oh shit, they went there. But it's a fake out. However, she does shoot the General, and we then get a play on the classic line.
She'll be back.
Anyway, Skynet has become self-aware, and in an hour, it's gonna initiate an attack on humanity. Yay! The T1s then start going trigger happy, and it all kicks off. Told to go to Crystal Peak, this is a bunker that will protect the pair. Now John believes it's the system core of Skynet, but we later learn
that was a fucking lie.
That's the system core?
It's your only chance.
In hindsight, he answers with "it's your only chance" rather than saying yes. Looking back, we know the General was aware Skynet couldn't be shut down, and thus he just wanted to protect his daughter. We then get another
Get down!
Get down! And a Terminator versus Terminator fight. Now apparently both the TX and T-850 were wearing thongs in this scene, with the latter grabbing his off the stripper. Now for research purposes, I slowed this whole thing down here to try and spot it, but I couldn't make either thong out. However, they smash up everything including the bathroom sink and drop down through the floor. The TX ends up flipping herself around, which feels like it's building off the back of when the T-1000 switched sides in Terminator 2. The TX then ends up kicking his head off and infecting him with her virus. Later on when he reboots, we can see the video player installed in Terminators is a QuickTime player, which nice bit of attention to detail, and I love how they kind of repurpose programs at the time. While this is going on, Catherine gets her time to shine by destroying one of the hunter killers, showing off that military training. This then leads to them running into a particle accelerator, which they did with some VFX trickery. Now according to IMDb trivia, building a fully realized one would cost $1.5 million. So instead they built some of it and then rearranged these sections to make it seem like a continuous set. They would redress certain parts so it didn't just seem like they were running on the same section, which they refer to as the Flintstone effect. They also use matte paintings to cover some of the backgrounds where the set ran on past reality. Really works though, and magnetized we see as the TX gets stuck to it and her liquid metal skin starts to peel off. This and the following shot of it coming off was one of the most complicated VFX shots in the film, with it taking over a year to completely animate. The T-850 then arrives under the TX's control, but we see as it overrides the program. I don't know how it works, mate, but it's a nice one of them. Reach deep inside yourself moments. And you know what? I think I might like this movie, mate. Either way, they fly across the desert, which is when my first showing broke. Arriving there, they discover a blast door, which is the first hint this is a bunker. Before they can think about it too much though, they're swarmed once more by the TX, which leads into the final showdown with the T-850. This begins with her crashing a helicopter with a script explaining that she also used this to initially fly to the base. This was radioed after the fight at the cemetery, but they cut it as you didn't need to know. However, the helicopter itself was similar to the one from T2, so it would have been a bit of a visual callback. Arnie then comes in with a bigger and badder one.
I'm back.
Which, you get the reference, mate, you get it.
He said it!
Both machines are heavily destroyed, and at this point, this was the most effects heavy we'd ever seen the Terminator damaged. The TX ends up crawling along the floor, and the 850 grabs her wires to hold her back. This crawling riffs off the first film when the T-100 crawled after Sarah in the factory. Also, I love how the T-850 tells John he'll see him again, and as we know, he's the machine that kills him. Nice way to say goodbye that. The 850 uses the fuel cells set up before to blow them both up. That's Chekhov's fuel cells for you there. Now in a callback to the first film, he tells her she's terminated, which is also what Sarah said to the machine at the factory. Descending into the basement, we then get the gut punch of realizing that this place is more like an underground villain's lair. It's got plants to provide oxygen, comfy chairs in a bar, and also a podium for the president to do a speech from. It's the perfect place to lie low and wait out the apocalypse, and John assumes command after answering a radio call. He's trained his whole life to fight the machines and is the only person on Earth who has extensive knowledge of them. Rewatching the scene at the end, I still got goosebumps, and to me, that's the sign of a great ending. And you know what? I even teared up a bit watching the nukes take off and 3 billion get killed. You know when you just get emotional and you get goosebumps and you start crying? I don't know if it was the music or what. Don't know if it was all those people dying, but I was a little tear, and I think that's why the ending works brilliantly even 20 years later. John's dream of the future has sadly come true, and we see the Terminator's skull amongst the clouds of ash as the real battle begins. And what a great way to end the movie. However, there are thoughts that there was originally a different direction that the creative team were going to go. In the game, the Terminator is thrown into a time displacement device where he winds up back in the future. He finds John and Kate dead and decides to arm up and fight the war himself. Because of this, it's been thought that they may have wanted to do this originally for that 4th film. Games have to go into development very early on because of the time it takes to make, so fans have suspected they worked off the outline when they were planning on shooting part 3 and 4 back to back. Guessing with time travel though that Kate and John would have been saved in some way or another, but yeah, that's just what people theorize about. I'll not do theory time though, I'll not annoy you with that. But yeah, as of this video, it's been 1 year and 1 month since we did our Terminator 2 breakdown, but you know what? I'm annoyed at myself for taking so long. Though I can see flaws and that it doesn't measure up to the first 2 films, I still had a really good time going back through it. So you can get off my back about it, but thank you for finally getting me to do it, as I've genuinely enjoyed going back. I don't know if it was the nostalgia or the action or even that ending, but yeah, I had fun rewatching this movie. Now what we're working on in the moment, there's a little clue in the background. You might notice we've got lots of books that I've been picking up. I'm currently reading The Fellowship of the Rings, and at the moment I'm 150 pages in. They haven't left the Shire yet, but once that's done, I'm gonna get working on a breakdown. As mentioned earlier, the 4K of Silence of the Lambs is out now as well, so I'll be jumping on that in the meantime and also doing the Batman. Either way, there's lots to stick around for, and if you enjoy the video, please hit the thumbs up. Also, if you want to become a member of the channel in the Spoiler Side Squad, then please click the join button. You'll get early access to videos every week just like this, and it helps us to continually up our production quality in videos. We really appreciate everyone who joins it. It's 99 cents a month or $12 or less than $12 a year, sorry. But yeah, it makes a massive difference to us, and hopefully it's at a price point where it won't make a massive difference to you. Totally fine if you don't want to do it, you know, just even watching through the video this long, it makes a massive difference to the watch time and recommends us to other people. Now if you want something else to watch, you've got a breakdown of The Matrix Reloaded on screen right now. That's our last classic movie breakdown, and if you missed our breakdown of the first film, that's also on the channel as well. Huge thank you for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.